Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whatever part of the world you're in, and thanks very much for taking the time to join me. I'm Sean McLaughlin, and I'll be with you for the next hour, thereabouts. As Cassandra said, this is peak leadership, and what we're going to focus on today is the whole area around getting the best use out of your time. So that's really what we're kind of looking at. I'll just do a quick introduction. Just waiting for these slides to move on. Then it should be good. If I bring your attention, there's going to be a couple of polls throughout the session. So again, if you get an opportunity, I know some of you, there'll be groups of you listening in at the same time. So if you can get a consensus from the group and put it into the polls when they come out, that'd be fantastic. And also you can see that there's a chat pod on the right hand side of your screen. So again, we'll have a bit of discussion throughout the session, and you can use the chat pod either to ask some questions or indeed when we're having discussions, just put in your thoughts in there. That would be fantastic. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Sean McLaughlin, and I set up Learning Curve back in 2001. And what we specialize in is the whole area around performance management and how to get the best performance out of yourself and also out of your team. And we run a number of different webinars on that sort of topic and lots of workshops throughout the year. So the peak leadership, what's it all about? What I'm going to do is just kind of go briefly through what we're going to cover over the next 4 weeks, and then we get stuck into today's session. Now, this slide is just a little bit slow changing there, but just bear with me. So the first one is today is all to do with the whole area of how you use your time, and particularly as managers, one of the biggest challenges facing managers is the pull on their time. Everybody's looking for them. You have your job to get done, and then you have your team to look after, you've senior management to look after, and all the time people are pulling at you for your time. So what we're going to look at is how to plan, and the key word here is schedule your day, your week, your month, in order to make sure that the most important things get done. The time management balance sheet for me is the game changer. When I do this workshop with management, it's when they started realizing this is where things change for them. And we have a look at that and what the balance sheet actually is. Then we look at the last bit of the sessions around understanding how you really use your time compared to how you think you use your time. And it's not around time sheets, but it's about doing a time audit to kind of look at where the interruptions coming from, how's my time being spent, who's stealing my time from me. And the last bit then is the impact influence model, whereby we see, well, what do we do with that information? Then in session 2, we look at, it's very much around the building a performance-based relationship within your team. It's what I call team time. It's looking at the ways of working, and embedding that into the way you do things so everybody can be much more efficient. Looking at how to deal with conflict situations, which is usually one of the trickier parts of managing people. Some managers try to avoid it a little bit because it makes the situation worse, but in reality, you got to deal with this up front. So we look at the ways of doing that, looking at how we can make team meetings a little bit more engaging, and we also look at another challenging part for managers, which is delegating tasks. Then in week 3, we move on to the core skills of influencing, coaching, developing your team. The core principles around influencing, the push and pull theory, how our style of influencing impacts people. Some people are easier to influence, but in reality, they're not easier to influence. It's just the style you're using works with them, but it doesn't work with other people. So we got to adapt our style. And then we look at coaching, which really, for me as a manager, underpins everything we do. The role of coaching. It's a style of managing now that to get the best out of people within your team, you need to start looking at how do I coach rather than instruct and tell. And then the last bit is, which is kind of looking at making sure that everybody has a personal learning and development plan, that everybody on your team is looking to develop themselves to be better at what they actually do. Which leads nicely into the last session, which is really around having meaningful performance conversations. And what this is about is the 3 sessions that we're talking about is getting ready for the session 4, which is getting the best performance out of people on your team. And what underpins this is regular conversations with everybody on your team, together with setting goals that people can buy into. have clarity around what they're expected to do, and then to create regular conversations around feedback to make sure that feedback should be part and parcel of how you run the team. It shouldn't be given just when there's criticism, when there's something wrong, when somebody's made a mistake. It should be part and parcel of how you interact with everybody on your team. So that's what we're going to cover over the next 4 weeks. To get the best out of these sessions, I always like to have an action plan. The action plan that works best with the that I find from talking to the people that have been on workshops with me is to create a very simple one as we work through the process. So on a blank piece of paper, what I want you to do is draw 3 columns. In the first column, I want you to write what are you going to start doing. In the second column, I want you to write what are you going to stop doing. And in the third column, I want you to write what are you going to do more of. Now, as we go through the sessions and an idea is generated that you think is a good idea that you're not doing at the moment, write it down there and then and put that into your action plan. The stuff that you're doing that maybe you should think about stop doing, again, take a note of it there and then. And all the things that you're doing that are really good, again, take a note of those. And if you write in 2 or 3 ideas in each of those columns, suddenly you have 10, 12, 15 actions that you can take over the next 100 days that will get the best performance out of your team. So think about that as we go through today's session and over the next 3 weeks. So the first exercise I want you to do, just for yourself, is to write down, if I was to give you an extra 30 minutes in the day, what would you do with it? So if I gave you an extra 30 minutes and I said, there's a free 30 minutes for you, what would you do with that? Now, it's important you write this down because we'll come back to it towards the end of the session. But from your personal point of view, it doesn't matter what the person next to you is doing, what would you do if I gave you an extra 30 minutes in the day? Okay. And let's look at how are we going to make that happen? What are we going to do to make that happen? As managers, particularly managing people, managing teams, one of the things that I have come across over the years, particularly when I do one-to-one coaching with managers, is this phrase, and this is why I love this phrase, because this quote, I should say, has been around for thousands of years. Time is a created thing. To say I don't have time is like saying I don't want to. When it comes to managing people, lots of managers will say to me, Sean, I love to do all of what you're talking about, but I don't have the time to do it. I'm so busy doing this and I'm so busy doing that. In reality, when I start pressing them further and further, and we really get into a serious conversation, it's the last phrase there, I don't want to. Other things seem more important at the time, and I'll always push the managing of the people bit to one side until it becomes critical. And we get into firefighting mode. There's a problem, there's a crisis, there's a conflict going on, somebody's made a mistake, and I'll go in, I'll fix it, job sorted, then move on. But that's not really managing people. That's not the way we can go about to get the best out of people. So we got to say is, how do we ensure that we set aside time for managing our people going forward, our team? And our time is being squeezed. There's no doubt about that. Everybody here is busy, really, really busy. And we can either go down the blame culture where we look for excuses not to do something or reasons not to manage the people on our team, or we take responsibility for it and say, no, I'm going to set aside 30 minutes a day to manage my team. And that can seem to be a little bit counterproductive in the sense of, I have clients to look after, billable hours, focusing on getting the job done. And Sean is saying here, let's take 30 minutes to 40 minutes a day managing the people on my team. In reality, what you got to do is look at the sort of the long-term gain. Which is more important, that everybody on your team becomes more productive by 5, 10, 15%, or you keep doing everything. And the reality is, the more productive you get your team, the more goals and targets you will achieve. And what I'm talking to you about today is based originally on a book that I wrote about 10 years ago, but it's been updated on one that I'm currently writing at the minute that's just with the editorial team at the moment. And these 4 principles that I'm talking about really underpins everything that the research that I've done over the last 10 years from the various different workshops. And for me, it's summed up with this phrase here: time management is not about managing time. It's about managing yourself and those around you, and let time take care of itself. Time will move 24 hours in a day, 7 hours at work, or 8 hours that you have in work. It'll still go as quickly today as it will tomorrow as it did the day before. But it's how you use that time. That's the critical thing. There's no quick fix here. It's about your ability to make decisions, to communicate, to influence people, to prioritize tasks, to be assertive, to be a high performer. It's not about the latest gizmos, okay, the latest technology. Everything I talk to you today is technology neutral. So yes, by all means, use the latest apps, the latest technology that's available to you. But it's not about the technology, it's how you use it. That's the critical thing. And that's why it's so important that it's technology neutral. So let's get a bit of talking going. If you can use the chat pod on the right-hand side of your screen. The obvious answer to this question is, of course, you wouldn't run a business without a business plan. So the real question that I want you to answer is, what does a business plan give you? Okay, so from your point of view, if you're saying it to your client, you must put a business plan together. What does a business plan give you? Okay, so I just want you to write, and if you send it to all, so therefore I can see it, some of your answers, that would be great. So you just use the chat pod on the right hand side. It just takes a minute or so for them to come through, but just looking for what are your suggestions. Okay, so just as it's going through, what sort of things does a business plan give you? Okay, so just as I'm waiting for them to come through. Some of the things that are coming through, it gives you a sense of direction. Very good. It gives you a plan, naturally. Some objectives that you want to achieve. It will give you things like budgets. Okay, very good. Also, it will give you things such as benchmarks. How far are we progressing against where we want to be? Okay, so just waiting for some. I know some of you are writing at the moment. Okay. And some competitors, so information about competitor analysis. Clients potential, okay, so who's your market analysis? So again, some great things going in there. So you've got competitors, metrics to measure against, obstacles, projections, use of resort, revenue, profits, okay, guidance and structure and strategy. So keywords there: guidance, structure and strategy, communication of priorities, provides direction. Okay, so thanks to everyone, Kirsten, William, Mike, Norman. There's a whole host of people. I can't read all your names coming through, so lots of really good ideas there. Now, what does this mean? So what has this got to do with what we're talking about here today? We're going to just do our very first poll, and I'm going to come back to your list there in a second. So I'm just going to give our first poll is just going to come up now on the screen. Okay. So really is the very first poll is, how many people here use to-do lists? Okay, I'll just have a look at your answers there. How many people use today? Simple yes, no, or sometimes. Okay, lots of people are voting at the moment. Nearly 70% of you have voted so far. Not surprisingly, 85% of you so far is in the yes, and about 15%, if my maths are great, are sometimes. So that's just changing now. 87, 13. So the vast majority of you use to-do lists. Okay, so again, really appreciate you taking the time to vote there. Not surprising. That's pretty much what I would get in most workshops. Okay, so just going to close this over, and we go back to the screen now in a second. So what the to-do list, they've been around for donkey's years. They're stable diet of any sort of time management workshop that's ever done. But what I'm going to do is, when I was doing the research again for the original book, it suddenly became, it was a big myth that the to-do lists the to-do lists are the answers to any time management woes that people actually have. You know, you have a problem with how you're using your time, do a to-do list, and that will sort it out. When I started digging a little bit deeper and find, say, okay, what's kind of going on here? What's this? What's happening with to-do lists? Because what was happening with people, or people were saying to me is, yeah, I have the to-do list, but it works a bit. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes it does work. But what is becoming is, it's almost like a have to do list. It's a list of all the things that I have to do. So I write it down so I don't forget them. Traditionally, people will put them on a notepad. Nowadays, a lot of people will put them on their phones or on a spreadsheet, and they have them there the whole time. But interestingly, what I was finding from a lot of people, and I don't know whether you're the same, but a lot of people became a little bit demotivated with their to-do list, because what they were finding was they had this long list of tasks and they wrote them all down Monday morning. Here's all the things I have to do. And by the end of Monday, the list was longer than it was at the start of the day. The list had grown during the day, even though they were working really, really incredibly hard. So what I was looking at is, what do we need to do to make the to-do list better? Okay, and so it's time really to get rid of them and replace it with the business plan approach. So when I asked you, what does a business plan give you? Some of the things you were talking about there was strategy. What it was giving you was matrix to measure against, projections, the use of resources, objectives, guidance, strategy, structure. And these are all the critical things that it's actually giving you. And what that means is that once it starts giving you that, this is what you want your to-do list to be. You want it to be a structure to your day, your week, your month, a strategy for getting important things done, and not just a list of items. And that's what we need to be focusing our attention on. So what we need to do is upgrade the to-do list to make it work for us, and particularly for us as managers, so we can get the best use out of our time, so we have time available to manage our team. So we're going to use Kipling's 6 serving friends: the what, the why, the when, the how, the where, and the who. In other words, I'm going to ask 6 questions to see how we can go about upgrading to a business plan approach when it comes to to-do lists. And the first one, and really critical, is the first principle, and it's planning. And you see the word scheduling. A lot of people will talk about planning your day, planning your week, but it's more than planning. It's planning and scheduling your day, your week, your month. And this underpins everything we talk about here today. So what we really need to be focusing our attention on, the first question: why do I need to plan and schedule? Okay, so the first question, why do I need to do it? And all you have to answer that question for yourself. I can only answer it from my perspective, why I do it, but you all need to say, right, what's so important to me that if I put in a good plan and schedule, what will happen? What's the benefit to me? And the way I look at it is that we have a limited amount of time available each day. So what I'm trying to do is, when I plan and schedule, is to get the most out of that particular day. So I want to protect my time. And I want to protect my time to do important stuff. And in that way, I get more done. Okay, so that's really effectively why I do it. And I want to make sure that I achieve the key priorities in a day. And again, when I'm working with a lot of managers, this was really important from their perspective. There's no doubt that everybody's really, really busy. And there was no sort of people saying that I have this extra time all over the place. It wasn't about that. It was, how do I plan and schedule so I get the right things done at the right time? And it's all about the principles around how many hours I'm available each day to work on these key priorities. And let's be honest, there's a lot of distractions going on every day. You have phone calls coming through from important clients. You have emails bouncing in all over the place. You have to, we're social animals, so we have to have coffee breaks, have a chat with people. Then we have our team coming towards us, trainees asking information. They're new, they're trying to find their way. Then we have our seniors always coming looking for more information from us, or how to do this, and we go into fixing mode and we fix things. And instead of saying, right, how do I protect my time a little bit better? How to ensure that I have time for my team as well as I have time to get all the important stuff done. So that's why I do it. So so that's one of the key elements, and it's why, again, with the research I've done with the people that I've worked with over the last 10 years or more on this topic, it was a big mind change for people. they're starting to protect their time in the same way they protect meetings. And that's really what they were thinking about. Which leads me to the second question is, where should I keep my planner? There's, we get a phone call, somebody's looking to make a meeting, we write it down on our post-it, we're meeting at 2 o'clock and have a conference call at 4:30. But if you just left those on post-its all over the place, we really wouldn't have the full picture of what's going on in our day. So if that post-it was just left on our screen, it would look like we have two things to do today: a meeting at 2 o'clock and a conference call at 4:30. Now, what's going on between 2 and 4:30? We might have stuff written down on a to-do list. Oh, I have to do a report. I have to do an analysis of this set of accounts. And then we might have in our diary something else. So there's things all over the place. So we need to have all the information in one location and one location only. And for me, that's the diary. And whether you use the latest technology, using your smartphone and putting everything there, or the humble paper diary, it doesn't matter. As I said at the start, everything we talk about is technology neutral. Use what works for you, paper-based or electronically, okay? But the critical thing is everything is in the one location. So the diary now becomes the place where all important items are stored. That's meetings, that's tasks that you have to do, that's follow-up calls you have to do, training sessions that you have to do, anything at all that's really, really important, it gets into the diary. And that's the one location, because now what we have is the full picture. Not only the full picture of today, but we have the full picture of what's coming down the week, what's coming down the month. And our planning and scheduling becomes much tighter, because now we can make the decisions based on all the information, rather than post-its here, a notebook over there, and something else in an electronic diary, and something else in a paper diary, and everything is all over the place. Which leads me to the next question. And the next question is fairly straightforward. How do I structure my planner? Okay. Now, if we use the principle of the diary, and that's where we're going to keep it in the diary, well, then we keep it simple. So we're just going to do the second poll. And again, this is an important poll because it's another part of the research that I got for where things were going wrong for people. So the question becomes, how many of you who use to-do lists would write how much time it takes to do each of the tasks you put on your to-do list? So we're just going to get the second poll up on the screen now. It'll come up on the screen in a second. There it is. So when you on your to-do list, do you write how much time each task takes? Yes, no, or sometimes? Okay. So again, thanks for everybody. You're flying into it. Okay, we're nearly 60% of you have voted, so we'll just wait for another few of you to vote. Okay, brilliant. You're quick on the buzzer, as they say. That's great. We're up to 80% of you now voted, so that's great. There's just one or two more to vote in there. Now, these results are not overly surprising. 7% of you is yes, we'll put an estimated time. 60% is no, and 33% is sometimes. The reality of it, and again, thanks for everybody there for voting. We just close it off. This is really important that we move away from just writing lists. It's one of the key factors why traditional to-do lists have failed, because it's just a list of items. Now, again, when we said, why do we do a business plan? One of the things we put in down there was budgets. And now I know from the business plan, you're talking about financial budgets, but the same principle, this is about budgeting your time, which is probably even more important than budgets when it comes to finances, because you can always get more finance, but you can't get more time. So it's around understanding how much time each task takes. Now, what's interesting, when somebody gives you a call about a meeting, and they'll say, look, I want to have a meet with you at 3 o'clock. Yep. The first thing you do is you check your diary, see are you free, and the next thing you'll check is how long is the meeting going to be, so you can then plan it out. Is it a 30-minute meeting? Is it a 40-minute meeting? Is it an hour-long meeting? You get a rough idea. Now, the same principles need to apply to tasks. And if you notice, I've written two columns here. One is the estimated time and the other is the actual time. Now, the reason for that is that some tasks are slightly difficult to kind of gauge how long is it going to take. So I would always write down, estimate how long I think this is going to take me, or I'll break the task down into more manageable chunks and see how long each part will take. When I have the task completed, I will then write down how long it actually took me. So the next time I have a similar type of task to do, I have a better understanding how long it realistically will take. The third column here, or the last column here you see is the priority levels. We'll talk about priorities a little bit later in the session. So I just marked it there, but we'll come back to it a little bit later. But for the moment, the estimated time is absolutely crucial that we get into that habit, because it leads me to principle number 2. And principle number 2 is the game changer that I mentioned at the very start. Again, when I worked through this in sort of the workshops, when we start doing it for real, for everybody starts doing it for their own, and I really recommend you do this yourselves. It started putting a completely different mindset on planning and scheduling. Where this came from was I lecture also, and one for ACCA, and like most lecturers, you're trying to get the class to start studying from day one. And as you all know, you're all qualified now at this stage, you've all been through it. Most of you will, as indeed my class, will look at me, nod because it's the first day in class and say, yeah, but totally ignore what I'm saying. In other words, you won't start studying on day one. It's pretty standard, and we get into the cramming stage at the end. And in the last couple of weeks, I used to get a whole host of students coming up to me and saying, Sean, if only you listened to you on day one, can I have an extension? And and said, no, it's nothing to do with me. The exams are there, you got to do it. And then they're looking, how do I cram and what should I leave out? So I was racking my brains, how would I get people to start doing it in day one? And what I came up with, obviously, being an accounting subject, I came up with a balance sheet and said, this is probably the best way to get people focused on studying from day one. So what I got the class to do was to write down what are all the things you need to do to understand a chapter fully so you can pass the exam. So they said things like reread the chapter, do past exam questions, do up your notes, the usual thing. And they came up with about 6 things that you would actually do. I then asked them to write down beside each one of those, how long do you think it'll take you? So to reread the chapter, do past exam questions, understand the chapter, reduce your notes. How long do you think you need to spend on one specific chapter? So it averaged out somewhere around 4 to 5 hours for some, and like everybody has their own time on it, because you might have to do it twice in that. So we came up with they came up and agreed with a figure of 5. So okay, multiply by, we had 26 chapters. Okay, so you can do the maths there. And then I said, okay, multiply by 2 subjects you're doing, so double that up. So we were up at somewhere like 260 hours thereabouts. Now that was fine. Nobody was overly excited at this stage, so we still smiley faces and going on, until I went to the other side of the balance sheet, the time available. When we started going through it, because they were all working, studying at night time, coming to class 2 nights a week, studying 2 nights a week, we said take Friday off, studying 4 hours on Saturday, 4 hours on Sunday. It came up to 12 hours. Most people were comfortable with 12 hours. But when we multiplied that with roughly 10 weeks to go to the exams, suddenly there's a massive realization the balance sheet didn't balance. The time available was half the time they needed, nearly, to get the job done. So it was the first realization that every week that they went without studying was another 12 hours lost. So it will really galvanize them to start studying much earlier. From our point of view in the work environment, it's the same principle. On a Monday morning, you need to do the time management balance sheet, not only for Monday, but for the rest of the week. You look at your long list of items that you have to do, and for most you haven't even put times beside it. Okay? Only 7% of people put times beside each one of those. So how long do you think it's going to take you to do all of the items that are on your to-do list? We had no idea. Now we got to start looking at that. But more importantly, on the other side of the equation, how many hours have you got available to you? Every day is different. You might have 3 hours available because you already, the other 4 hours have been taken up between meetings with clients, meeting with other departments, other things are going on that you've already allocated that time to on a post-it somewhere. So now not only do you need to do the time management balance sheet for today, but you got to do it for the rest of the week, for the rest of the month. The balance sheet will always balance. In other words, when you walk out of the office, the time available finishes at that stage. But how well have you used the time available to balance with the time that's required to do everything that was on your to-do list? That becomes the critical question. There's no overdraft facility available in this balance sheet. The time available is all the time that you have, okay? So what's the criteria you use to calculate how many hours you need to achieve all your key priorities? So we got to start thinking about that. The sort of thing to say, and this is where it becomes even more muddy. You get a task, but there's 3 weeks before you need it. I should have 3 weeks to do that. Not when you start doing the balance sheet, you don't have 3 weeks available to you, because a lot of the time between now and then has already been allocated. So you need to start breaking that down into how many hours have I got and when do I need to start. The other crucial thing here is how much time have you set aside for your team? Having regular performance conversations with them, coaching your people on your team, finding out what's going on in their lives, giving them feedback, helping them with their work, delegating to them. All of the things you need to run a really successful team. Where's the time allocated for that? So that's what you got to, this is why the balance sheet is so important going forward. So let's see how we're going to use it. Okay, so yes, before we throw out the big to-do list, turn it into a master list. That's what I call it. I have a master list. All right, jot it down on a folder, piece of paper, write it all down. But as I said to you, I wasn't finding it very, very helpful. But I still have it, but now I've moved it on. And what has happened with it is that seeing that I've listed everything there, it's become my checklist. Okay, and that's my checklist, so I don't forget anything. And what I've noted beside each one of those items is how long it's going to take me to do it. Okay, and so that becomes, and that's the first thing you got to do. List down all the things you have for the rest of the week, the rest of the month you got to do, and put an estimated time beside it. Now, I was doing this exercise with a team, and the way we did it was the company that I was doing it for, because we were doing a full day session, we did 2 half days. So I divided it into 2 half days. So they were able to do a bit of the work that I'm asking you to do, but they came back the following week where we then looked on what they actually had done to see what's happening. This exercise I got them to do frightened the living daylights out of a couple of people. And one big guy who's coming, he said, I'm so upset and depressed. Now, I thought he was having a bit of banter and a bit of fun. And he turned around and said, Sean, no, I am serious. I'm just after writing down how long it's going to take me to do everything that I have on my list. And I'm not going to get it done. It's going to take me a year and a half to get it all done. There's so much to do. And it was a certain realization in his mind that, you just can't keep taking on task more and more stuff unless you can start planning and scheduling it and doing the balance sheet and seeing how much time he's got available versus how much time he actually needed. It was a real eye opener for him. It was fascinating to see and what he had to do going forward. So that's the first thing you got to do. Everybody's got to do that. Write it all down. And then the question then becomes, can I complete this list? Is it possible to complete this list? Will I be able to get it done? For most people, the balance sheet won't balance. Your master list will be far greater than the time available. So the question then becomes, how do we balance the balance sheet? Because we know a balance sheet has to balance. There's only 2 ways that I know a balance sheet can balance in this situation. If there's any others that you can think of, please let me know. Send me another idea. So we can do 1 or 2 things. On the right-hand side, the time required, we can get rid of things off the master list and say, I'm not going to do that. I can't do it. I haven't got time to do it. The question then becomes, which ones do we get rid of? On the blue side, we can stay later, work an extra couple of hours. But at some stage, we got to go home. So at some stage, the time available hits the cutoff point. And it's counterproductive. Staying late every single night, means that we reduce the amount of work we get done during the day. Okay, so we either add more hours to the time available or we reduce the master list. Now, if we're going to reduce the master list, we got to start prioritizing. It's the only way we can do it. Now, prioritizing, there's not an exact science when it comes to prioritizing. Every company is slightly different when it comes to prioritizing. One of the couple of things to be very careful about is this old urgent, important. Urgency should never trump importance. Being busy doing the right things or being busy doing the wrong things. We're busy, but are we busy doing the right things? Are we busy doing the wrong things? And for lots of people, when we start analyzing what they're doing on a daily basis, they're busy doing the wrong things. They're doing items that are urgent, but not that important. They're doing it because somebody's shouting at them, demanding that they get this piece of work done, but it may not be the most important piece of work to do. As managers, we need to avoid, when we're giving a piece of work to somebody and putting on it a post-it that says priority, now, as soon as possible, urgent, needed yesterday. They're all meaningless phrases. What does as soon as possible mean? It means different things to everybody. As soon as possible for me, it could be I'll get it done by the end of the week. As soon as possible by you, got it done by before I go home this evening. Different things to different people. And when we get to delegating, we revisit this where we have to be very specific. I need this report done by 3 o'clock on Wednesday. Not as soon as possible, 3 o'clock on Wednesday. Now that person has a chance to plan and schedule the item. They now have a realistic deadline that they can work with, and they can then work around their schedule to make sure that gets done by 3 o'clock on Wednesday. And that's where we need to go. We can no longer be a prisoner of urgency, because to be honest with you, I think everybody says everything is urgent, even when it's not urgent. So we got to move away from firefighting, particularly as managers, stop the firefighting and become much more strategic. And the bigger the habit we get into when we're saying things to our people on our team, this is when I need it by, the more we can get our team to be much more strategic focused than firefighting. And what's interesting, if we were having a meeting, if we were setting up a meeting with somebody, we would never say things like, can I have a meeting? It's urgent. Can I have a meeting? I needed it yesterday. Can I have a meeting now? Can I have a meeting as soon as possible? Because they'll turn around straight away and say, okay, when is that? And we look at a diary. So if they wanted it now, the first thing you look at diary, well, I can't do it now because I'm actually meeting with a client. I'm on my way to meet a client. This is when I can do it. Tasks should be the same thing. And if we're using the time management balance sheet, before we take on another task, we should look at the balance sheet to see, is there available time? Do I have time available to be able to do this specific task? So let's look at how we prioritize. Now, the prioritizing grid has been around, again, a bit like the to-do list. They're around a long time, 30, 40, 50 years at this stage. This is my take on it, okay? So lots of writers have written about it, but this is just my take on it. I like to work in colors because it helps me when I'm scheduling things. It's, I can highlight them in various different colors. So the grid is straightforward, based on importance and urgency. The green zone is the stuff that gets done straight away. And that's items that are important and urgent. So they have a deadline. I know what the deadline is, and it's an important activity. For me, the green zone gets into my diary. That goes straight into my diary. Now, I rarely would have a green zone on my master list. It's usually when it's an important item and we have a deadline on it, I look and I schedule it into my diary. So I know when I'm going to start it and when it's need to be finished by. The red zone is, though, particularly as managers, you need to be very careful about red zone. Red zone are items that are urgent but not that important from your perspective. So the question becomes, do you have time to really be doing this particular task, or should you delegate it? I would, as I mentioned, I would do a lot of work with new managers. Specifically with new managers, this would come up. And as they move into the role of managing people, very often they don't get rid of a lot of tasks because they like doing them. It's what I call hobby tasks. And what's happened then is they're now expected to manage a team which is taking on further responsibility, more roles, more tasks, as well as continue what they were doing. And they never took a step back and said, right, okay, now that I'm managing the team, I have to do all of these other things. Now what am I going to get rid of? And the red zone is what you got to get rid of. Move it on to somebody else on the team. Delegate it. The blue zone is your strategic zone. The blue zone are items that are important but not yet urgent. The more time you spent in blue zone time, the less stressful you will be, because you're chipping away at items that are important but not yet urgent. So we're not becoming this prisoner of deadlines. We're chipping away at it. And what's interesting is, and this is what I was trying to get across to the students on day one, studying is important but not urgent in day one of class. Exams are 2 or 3 months away. But as every week goes by, it's becoming more and more urgent. But what's happening is, on the time management balance sheet, the time required is still there to study all of these items, but the time available is getting less and less and less, and the balance sheet won't balance. But if they were chipping away from day one, they'd be ahead of those deadlines. And D, dump it. These are items that are not important, not urgent. Let's not waste any more time talking about those. There's the amber sign warning, do not go near them. Okay, so what you need to do now is just revisit your to-do list and look at color coding it. And here's how I work my diary. You might work it differently, but this is the way I do it. Green zone gets into my diary. So as it comes through, that's what I work on. Every day, where possible, I allow blue zone time. So I allocate blue zone time to chip away at important items, but not yet urgent. That's my wriggle room, my flexible one. So if something happens out of the blue, and I can shift the blue zone once, but the green never gets shifted. The blue one will get shifted. Okay. Here's another thing. When I'm scheduling, I do not fill my diary. My diary is never more than 2/3 full of tasks and meetings and everything else. I always leave 1/3 of my time available for the unknowns, the unexpected, the crisis. And in that way, I tend to, more often than not, get the green zone done on time. Okay, without having to work later, without having to drop something else, because of that wriggle room between the blue zone and only 2/3. Now, if nothing unexpected happens, that's more time for blue zone, and sometimes I will then, the third item I will do on a particular day, or it tends to be towards the tail end of the week, I do red zone work. Items that are urgent but not that important, and if I have an hour to spare towards the end of the week, I tend to look at my master list and start scribbling off, getting some of those items done. Only green and blue zone gets near my diary. Red and obviously amber doesn't get anywhere near my diary. Okay, and it works for me. Hopefully it will work for you also. But what you need to be doing is, at the end of each day, end of each week, is just have a quick look at your diary and make sure no green zone tasks were pushed out for a red zone task. In other words, make sure that what you said you're going to do, you got done on that particular day. And if not, find out why not, so it doesn't reoccur. And that's what we got to be thinking about. When should I do each task is the next question that's often asked. When should I do it? And there's an old cliche. First thing in the morning, do your most difficult task, get it out of the way. I don't buy into that fully, and here's why. For some people, the first hour in the day, the best they can hope for is getting up and getting into work on time. They're not morning people. So if possible, work where your clock is at the best. In other words, parts of the day where you have high energy, lots of drive, do the most complicated things there that requires the most concentration. Do it at that stage. For some people, it's actually the afternoon. For me personally, I'm a first hour in the day type of person. I like to get things done early, but that's just my body clock. Whereas the afternoon, I tend to leave shorter things, or things like returning phone calls, that type of activity that would naturally bring up my energy levels. I leave it, do that. But the writing, the things that requires lots of concentration, I do early in the day. Okay, so it's about understanding when is the most productive part of your day, and where possible, it's not always possible, but where possible, put in the most difficult things during those hours and it'll be more productive for you. So get in the habit of scheduling all your tasks in your planner. So when you're going to do the important things, and that way you protect your time and get it done. And remember the balance sheet. So just to recap what we've done, here, use your diaries. It keeps everything, the full story, everything is in the one place. So that's really important that you keep it there. We see that only 7% of you currently are using time frames beside each task when you do your master list. Make sure we get that up to 100%. Get into that habit. 30 minutes, half an hour. It's not going to be spot on. Now, don't be over optimistic, but what it's doing is giving you a sort of, a realistic that this is going to be an hour-long task. So allow for interruptions. Classify it. Is it green zone? Is it blue zone? Is it red zone? And not only use it daily, but use weekly, monthly planners, because what you're trying to look out for is what's coming down the tracks. It's a head-up approach. So you might see towards the tail end of the month, you have a lot of things that are coming up. So your deadlines don't shift. They're never a problem. Is your start time is your problem. Have you start early enough? And the more you dedicate to the blue zone, the more you stay ahead of those deadlines. So book in your priority A into your diary. Try as much as possible to allow time every day for your blue zone activities. And the last bit I say to you here is, before you take on any additional work, do the balance sheet. Have you got time available based on what you're already allocated into your diary? Have you capacity for taking on? And if not, then you have to have discussion in the same way you have a discussion around a meeting that you have already. Somebody's looking for a meeting at 3 o'clock, but you already have a meeting there for 3 o'clock. You negotiate another time. See, can you do that with the task? Otherwise, you're going to have to shift things around because you won't get it done. So just continue with your, hopefully at this stage, before we move into the last quarter, some ideas there. What are you going to start doing, stop doing, do more of? The second part of your plan to make it happen is the 24-hour rule. So whatever you've written down in your plan so far, start within the next 24 hours. Because if you don't, it will stay in your plan, because whatever excuse you have for not starting it tomorrow will be there the day after and the day after that. So what's really important is that you get started straight away. Okay, so that's what you got to be thinking about. Okay, and again, if you have any questions, just pop them into the questions or the chat pod there. Now, the next part, what we're going to have a look at, is how much of your time is spent doing non-priority tasks. Okay, is 5% of your day, 10% of your day, 20% of your day, 50% of your day? As managers, a lot of our time is stolen from us. We're not spending it doing our priority stuff. We're doing the non-priority stuff. Now, that could be doing hobby jobs that I mentioned earlier, doing stuff that you like doing, but you shouldn't really be doing. It could be where people are asking you to do things and they don't know what to be doing. Okay. Sorry, my screen is just bouncing there. So what we need to be thinking about, okay, is how much. And for most people, we don't really know. Now, this leads me to a big myth. I know how to spend my time. We know from a timesheet point of view roughly how we spend our time when we're billing clients. But what we don't really know is how we spend our time is what sort of interruptions are taking place, who's interrupting me, how much time is spent being interrupted. And as Peter Drucker says, there's nothing quite so useless as doing with great efficiency something that should not be done at all. So if you're doing tasks that are non-priority, but you're doing them well, that's not your role as a manager. And what tends to happen, what gets pushed to one side, when you look at the balance sheet, what gets dropped off is the team time. Spending time developing your team, spending time coaching, having performance conversations, finding out what motivation triggers people have, finding out, embedding ways of working, dealing with conflicts, all the critical things to make sure the team is working well, they tend to get shifted to one side. So what we need to do is, here is a simple question. Would you run a business without conducting a financial audit? And again, the answer will be no. Just in, sorry, Amanda, can you hear me now? Just, Amanda couldn't hear me there for a second, so hopefully you can, if you can type it in there. So here's, what does a financial plan give you? Okay, so if you can just use the chat pod there, what does a financial plan give you? Sorry, financial audit, I should say, not a financial plan. What does a financial audit give you? Just by way of the chat pod there. If you could answer in there, that'd be great. Okay. Thanks, Amanda. So just there, what does a financial plan give you? Okay, just people there going. Yeah, controls, assurances. Yeah, some good ideas coming up here. Confirmation of effectiveness, financial information about being fair. It's makes perfect sense. That's what we got to do. Which leads me to principle number 3. A financial audit is like the same way as putting the business under a microscope. And one of the interesting things, if a client came into you and said, listen, by the way, Monica, business isn't going well. We seem to be hemorrhaging a lot of money. We don't seem to be getting our debtors or paying us in time. The first thing you do, rather than going in with, here's what you got to do, the first thing you do is do a financial audit. Say, okay, let's find out what's happening here. Where's the money coming from? Where's the money going? What money's coming in? What money should be coming in? And you do a big audit and you find out what's actually happening. And it gives you that sort of overview. And what you're doing is you put the business under a microscope. A time audit for yourself is doing the exact same things. It's putting what you're doing with your day under the microscope. Now, what's very interesting here is that when I ask people to do this, everybody, when we go through it, agrees that it should be done. In reality, and we're going to just do our last poll, I'm just going to ask you this question. Okay, so we just do our final poll. And the poll is straightforward. Have you completed a time audit? Now, not a time sheet, a time audit in the last 6 months. Okay, so a time audit is one whereby you understand everything that's going on in your day, all the interruptions, time wasting activities. Okay, so we're just going, the poll will just come up now on the screen in a second. There it is there. So have you completed a time audit in the last 6 months? Yes or no? Now, not a time sheet, but a time audit. Okay, again, we're up to 50% of you voted already, really fast on the buzzers. Appreciate this. And again, the findings are pretty much in line with what I normally get. At the moment, we have 87% no and 13% yes. Okay, and that's with nearly 80% of you voting. We have 87% no and 13% yes. Okay, so I just close that off and we go back to the screen now. So thanks for that. The time audit, you cannot make any really good changes unless you do the time audit. The main reason why, again, when I check, why don't people do the time audit? The first thing that people will say is, oh, I haven't got time to do a time audit. Now, that's the biggest excuse that people have, but it's not a valid excuse. When it boils down to it, the difficulty with doing a time audit, it puts a mirror up there that a lot of people don't want to see. Okay, because what it does is it shows exactly what's kind of going on. Now, if you look at it, and here's a template that I would normally use, half the work is already done. The first column, the planned activity, you're already doing because you're using your diary now. The third column should be pretty much empty because what you said you're going to do should be what you actually do. So there shouldn't be too many things in the actual activity. So in other words, what goes in there is just something that you did that you weren't planning to do. Priority level is already done. So there's only 2 columns that you need to fill in. One is interruptions and the other is the person who's interrupting you. So if you're interrupted from your daily task, so you're working on something and somebody drops by your desk to ask you a question, you just make that recording there. It's because you're interrupted at that stage. How long was the interruption for? 3 or 4 minutes. And who interrupted you? So, and you do codes. So somebody dropping by, you just put down drop by. So D for drop by. And how long does it take you to write that? And then you get back to work. And then if you interrupted again, the phone, an email bounced in and you read it, whatever the interruptions are. And what you're trying to build up here is a true sense of how your day actually is. Now, what's here is it doesn't solve any problems. What it does is it reveals where your problems actually are. So it's not a solution, but what it really is mapping out where the interruptions. So what you find out is things like what part of the day you're interrupting most, who's interrupting you most, and what type of interruptions are there. So what's really important, what a lot of people find, is that a particular staff member could be interrupting you quite a lot. The solution could be more coaching for that particular person. But until we know what's happening, we can't get a really good solution, which leads me to principle number 4. And principle number 4 is around getting rid of interruptions that are of no value to you, time-wasting activities, and replacing them with much more productive activities. And as I mentioned, I like using grids because they're easy to use. And this is a grid that I came up with to help managers to kind of say, okay, we've done the audit, so what? Once you've done the audit, you just map it onto this grid. The green zone, and it's based on 2 things, impact and influence. Impact is how much time this interruption, time-wasting activity is taken from you. Influence is how much control you have over it. So in the green zone, for argument's sake, if you suffer from looking at your what apps group on your smartphone on a regular basis, or looking at a news feed or something on those lines, you could end up losing a half an hour to an hour of your day by just looking at your smartphone for social media. Now, what you can do there is, that's something that's eating up a half an hour, 45 minutes of your time. High impact and lots of control. Switch off your phone. Okay, switch off the social media aspect of your phone so you won't get distracted. People dropping by, a trainee dropping by a couple of times during the day, okay, asking for how do I do this, how do I do that. It could be this where when you're delegating, when we talk about in a couple of weeks time, is to have check-ins with that person. So instead of them dropping by your desk, you check in with them. So it means that you're not being interrupted all the time. So whatever the actions are in the green zone, what you got to do is list them up there and start eliminating those ones. Now the red zone are the danger ones. These are just 2 or 3 minute type of interruptions that in isolation doesn't seem like an awful lot. So it's low impact. However, the reason why I say you got to be ruthless here is that when the cumulative effect, when you do this over a period of time, there's actually could become 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes. Things like reading emails when they bounce in. C is items that are activities that are happening that have high impact, but do you have a lot of control over? A client calling you. On the surface, you may not be able to do much about it, but in reality, you might look at, is there some way that, particularly if it's the same client phoning me quite often, can I do something about that? And then the D zone is take a chill. You're interrupted, somebody's dropped by, it's a 30-second answer, and they're looking for a code or something like that. Give it to them, move on. Don't waste any more time on it. It's not eating up an awful lot of your time, and you don't have a lot of control over it. There's enough items in green and red zone for you to make a difference, okay? And what I would suggest you do is you replace quadrant A, so high impact ones, with the blue zone, and that way you can spend more time in blue zone so you stay ahead of deadlines. So just to recap what we're just after doing there, I highly recommend you do a time audit. Find out what's happening on your day on a daily basis, where the interruptions coming from, where the time wasting activities, and then use the impact influence grid to get rid of those activities, and that will set more time available for your team. So let's go back to what I said at the start of the day. There's more than enough room to get your 30 minutes back that you said what you wrote down at the very start of your day. This is what I do with my 30 minutes. If you start planning and scheduling using those 4 principles, you will get that 30 minutes. Hopefully, most of you wrote down in that 30 minutes was something to do with developing your team, because you should, I would recommend, have 30 minutes set aside at least 3 times a week for your team. Because remember, time management is not around managing yourself, it's around managing, or time management is not around managing time, it's around managing yourself and those around you, and let time take care of itself. And part of that is team time, where you're managing your team going forward. So a quick recap, just as we come to the end of today's webinar. Remember, it's a business planning approach rather than doing to-do lists. Structure, strategy, milestones, objectives, targets. That's what you want your to-do list to look like. So upgrade it. Do the time management balance sheet. Every week start off. I do it on a daily basis, but do it for the week where you look at time available, time required. And then make sure that you have enough time available for what you want to get done on a daily, weekly basis. Protect your time. The only way you can protect your time is understanding how your time has been stolen from you. Do the time audit. Where are the interruptions coming from? Who's doing it? Stay ahead of deadlines. Use the blue zone. And then that way you get the right things done because you stay ahead of deadlines. So just by way of finishing off, and I know I'm just on my time now. Next week, what we'll talk about is ways of working, embedding that into the culture of your team, dealing with difficult situations, and doing the art of delegation. So thanks very much for your time. I hope you found it useful today and that you enjoyed this session. If you have any questions, you can email me, Sean@learningcurve.ie. I will get back to you, but just be aware of different time zones, but I will get back to you within 24 hours, but just because of the time zones, it might be a little bit delayed. Or if you have any questions now, you can put them in the chat pod and I'll just stay on it for the next couple of minutes. Thanks for your time, and I look forward to talking to you all again next week.